This is a continuation of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft, comprising the first section of the third part. Part 3, A Search and an Evocation. Charles Ward, as we have seen, first learned in 1918 of his descent from Joseph Curwen. That he at once took an intense interest in everything pertaining to the bygone mystery is not to be wondered at. For every vague rumor that he had heard of Curwen now became something vital to himself, in whom flowed Curwen's blood. In his first delvings there was not the slightest attempt at secrecy. He talked freely with his family, though his mother was not particularly pleased to own an ancestor like Curwen, and with the officials of the various museums and libraries he visited. In applying to private families for records thought to be in their possession, he made no concealment of his object, and shared the somewhat amused skepticism with which the accounts of the old diarists and letter-writers were regarded. When he came across the Smith Diary and archives and encountered the letter from Jedediah Orne, he decided to visit Salem and look up Curwen's early activities and connections there, which he did during the Easter vacation of 1919. At the Essex Institute, which was well known to him from former sojourns in the glamorous old town of crumbling Puritan gables and clustered gambrel roofs, he was very kindly received, and unearthed there a considerable amount of Curwen data. He found that his ancestor was born in Salem Village, now Danvers, 7 miles from town, on the 18th of February, O.S. 1662-3, and that he had run away to sea at the age of 15, not appearing again for 9 years, when he returned with the speech, dress, and manners of a native Englishman, and settled in Salem proper. At that time he had little to do with his family, but spent most of his hours with the curious books he had brought from Europe, and the strange chemicals which came for him on ships from England, France, and Holland. Certain trips of his into the country were the objects of much local inquisitiveness, and were whisperingly associated with vague rumors of fires on the hills at night. Curwen's only close friends had been one Edward Hutchinson of Salem Village and one Simon Orne of Salem. Hutchinson had a house well out toward the woods, and it was not altogether liked by sensitive people because of the sounds heard there at night. He was said to entertain strange visitors, and the lights seen from his windows were not always of the same color. The knowledge he displayed concerning long-dead persons and long-forgotten events was considered distinctly unwholesome, and he disappeared about the time the witchcraft panic began, never to be heard from again. At that time Joseph Curwen also departed, but his settlement in Providence was soon learned of. Simon Orne lived in Salem until 1720, when his failure to grow visibly old began to excite attention. He thereafter disappeared, though 30 years later, his precise counterpart and self-styled son turned up to claim his property. The claim was allowed on the strength of documents in Simon Orne's known hand, and Jedediah Orne continued to dwell in Salem till 1771, when certain letters from Providence citizens to the Reverend Thomas Barnard and others brought about his quiet removal to parts unknown. Certain documents by and about all of these strange matters were available at the Essex Institute, the courthouse, and the Registry of Deeds, and included both harmless commonplaces such as land titles and bills of sale, and furtive fragments of a more provocative nature. There were 4 or 5 unmistakable allusions to them on the witchcraft trial records, as when one Hepzibah Lawson swore on July 16, 1692, at the court of Oyer and Terminen under Judge Hathorne, that 40 witches and the black man were wont to meet in the woods behind Mr. Hutchinson's house, and one Amity Howe declared at a session of August 8 before Judge Gedney that Mr. G.B. George Burroughs, on that night, put the divil his mark upon Bridget S., Jonathan A., Simon O., Deliverance W., Joseph C., Susan P., Mehitable C., and Deborah B. Then there was a catalogue of Hutchinson's uncanny library as found after his disappearance, and an unfinished manuscript in his handwriting, couched in a cipher none could read. Ward had a photostatic copy of this manuscript made, and began to work casually on the cipher as soon as it was delivered to him. After the following August, his labors on the cipher became intense and feverish, and there is reason to believe from his speech and conduct that he hit upon the key before October or November. He never stated, though, whether or not he had succeeded. But of greatest immediate interest was the Orne material. It took Ward only a short time to prove from identity of penmanship, a thing he had already considered established from the text of the letter to Curwen, namely that Simon Orne and his supposed son were one and the same person. As Orne had said to his correspondent, It was hardly safe to live too long in Salem. Hence he resorted to a 30-year sojourn abroad, and did not return to claim his lands except as a representative of a new generation. Orne had apparently been careful to destroy most of his correspondence, but the citizens who took action in 1771 found and preserved a few letters and papers which excited their wonder. There were cryptic formulae and diagrams in his and other hands which Ward now either copied with care or had photographed, and one extremely mysterious letter in a chirography that the searcher recognized from items in the Registry of Deeds as positively Joseph Curwen's. Providence, 1st May. Brother, my honored antient friend, due respects and earnest wishes to him whom we serve for your eternal power. I am just come upon that which you ought to know, concerning the matter of the last extremity and what to do regard it. I am not disposed to follow you and go away on act of my years, for Providence hath not ye sharpness of ye bay in hunting out uncommon things and bringings to trial. I am tied up in shippes and goods, and could not do as you did, besides the which my farme at Pawtuxet hath dunder it, what you know, that would not wait for my coming back as another. But I am not unready for hard fortunes, as I have told you, and have long worked upon you way of getting back after ye last. I last a night struck on you word as that bring up Yoga Sothotha, and saw for ye first a time that face spoke of by Ibn Shakabak in ye. And it said, that ye 3rd Psalm in ye Liber Damnatus hold as ye clavicle, with Sunna in V house, Saturn in trine, draw ye pentagram of fire, and say ye 9th verse thrice. This verse repeat each Rudimus and Hallows Eve, and ye thing will braid in ye outside spheres, and of ye seed of old shall one be born who shall look aback ye, though knowed not what he seekes. Yet will this avail nothing if there be no air, and if the salties, or the way to make the salties, be not ready for his hand. And here I will own, I have not taken needed steps nor found a much. Ye process is plaguey hard to come near, and it uses up such a store of specimens. I am hard put to it to get enough, notwithstanding the sailors I have from ye Indies. Ye people about are become curious, but I can stand them off. Ye gentry are worse than ye populace, beg more circumstantial in their acts, and more believed in what they tell. That Parson and Mr. Merritt have talked some, I am fearful, but no thing so far is dangerous. Ye chemical substances are easy of getting. There be 2 good chymists in town, Dr. Bowen and Sam Carew. I am fulling out what Borellus saith, and have helpy in Abdul al-Hazred his 7th book. Whatever I get it, you shall have. And in ye meanwhile, do not neglect to make use of ye words I have here given. I have them right, but if you desire to see him, employ the writing on ye piece of that I am putting in this packet. Say ye verses every Rudemas and Hallows Eve, and if her line run not out, one shall be in years to come, that shall look back and use what salties or stuff for salty, you shall leave him. Job 14. I rejoice you are again at Salem, and hope I may see you not long hence. I have a good stallion, and am thinking of getting a coach. There big one, Mr. Merritt's, in Providence already, though ye roads are bad. If you are disposed to travel, do not pass me by. From Boston, take ye Post Road, through Dedham, Wrentham and Attleboro. Good taverns be at all these towns. Stop at Mr. Bolcom's in Wrentham, where ye beddes are finer than Mr. Hatch's, but eat at ye other house for their cook is better. Turn into Province by Pawtucket Falls, and ye rode past Mr. Sales's tavern. My house opposite Mr. Appenitus Olney's tavern, off ye Town Street, first on ye north side of Olney's Court. Distance from Boston Stone about 44 miles. Sir, I am your oldie and true friend and served. In Almonson Metroton, Josephus C., to Mr. Simon Orne, Williams Lane, in Salem. This letter, oddly enough, was what first gave Ward the exact location of Curwen's Providence home, for none of the records encountered up to that time had been at all specific. The place was indeed only a few squares from his own home on the Great Hill's higher ground, and was now the abode of a Negro family much esteemed for occasional washing, house cleaning, and furnace-tending services. To find, in distant Salem, such sudden proof of the significance of this familiar rookery in his own family history was a highly impressive thing to Ward, and he resolved to explore the place immediately upon his return. The more mystical phases of the letter, which he took to be some extravagant kind of symbolism, frankly baffled him, though he noted with a thrill of curiosity that the biblical passage referred to, Job 14:14, was the familiar verse, If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait, till my change come. Young Ward came home in a state of pleasant excitement, and spent the following Saturday in a long and exhaustive study of the house in Olney Court. The place, now crumbling with age, had never been a mansion, but was a modest 2.5-story wooden townhouse of the familiar Providence colonial type, with plain peaked roof, large central chimney, and artistically carved doorway with rayed fanlight, triangular pediment, and trim Doric pilasters. It had suffered but little alteration externally, and Ward felt he was gazing on something very close to the sinister matters of his quest. The present Negro inhabitants were known to him, and he was very courteously shown about the interior by old Asa and his stout wife Hannah. Here there was more change than the outside indicated, and Ward saw with regret that fully half of the fine scroll and urn overmantels and shell-carved cupboard linings were gone, whilst much of the fine wainscoting and belection molding was marked, hacked, and gouged, or covered up altogether with cheap wallpaper. It was exciting to stand within the ancestral walls which had housed such a man of horror as Joseph Curwen. He saw with a thrill that a monogram had been very carefully effaced from the ancient brass knocker. From then until after the close of school, Ward spent his time on the photostatic copy of the Hutchinson cipher and the accumulation of local Curwen data. The former still proved unyielding, but of the latter he obtained so much and so many clues to similar data elsewhere that he was ready by July to make a trip to New London and New York to consult old letters whose presence in those places was indicated. This trip was very fruitful, for it brought him the Fenner letters with their terrible description of the Pawtuxet farmhouse raid, and the Nightingale Talbot letters in which he learned of the portrait painted on a panel of the Curwen Library. This matter of the portrait interested him particularly, since he would have given much to know just what Joseph Curwen looked like, and he decided to make a second search of the house in Olney Court to see if there might not be some trace of the ancient features beneath peeling coats of later paint or layers of moldy wallpaper. Early in August that search took place, and Ward went carefully over the walls of every room sizable enough to have been by any possibility the library of the evil builder. He paid especial attention to the large panels of such overmantels as still remained, and was keenly excited after about an hour, when on a broad area above the fireplace in a spacious ground-floor room, he became certain that the surface brought out by the peeling of several coats of paint was sensibly darker than any ordinary interior paint, or the wood beneath it was likely to have been. A few more careful tests with a thin knife, and he knew that he had come upon an oil portrait of great extent. With truly scholarly restraint, the youth did not risk the damage which an immediate attempt to uncover the hidden picture with the knife might have done, but just retired from the scene of his discovery to enlist expert help. In 3 days he returned with an artist of long experience, Mr. Walter C. Dwight, whose studio is near the foot of College Hill, and that accomplished restorer of paintings set to work at once with proper methods and chemical substances. Old Asa and his wife were duly excited over their strange visitors, and were properly reimbursed for this invasion of their domestic hearth. As day by day the work of restoration progressed, Charles Ward looked on with growing interest at the lines and shades gradually unveiled after their long oblivion. Dwight had begun at the bottom. Hence, since the picture was a 3/4 length one, the face did not come out for some time. It was meanwhile seen that the subject was a spare, well-shaped man with dark blue coat, embroidered waistcoat, black satin small clothes, and white silk stockings, seated in a carved chair against the background of a window, with wharves and ships beyond. When the head came out, it was observed to bear a neat Albemarle wig, and to possess a thin, calm, undistinguished face which seemed somehow familiar to both Ward and the artist. Only at the very last, though, did the restorer and his client begin to gasp with astonishment at the details of that lean, pallid visage, and to recognize with a touch of awe the dramatic trick which heredity had played. For it took the final bath of oil and the final stroke of the delicate scraper to bring out fully the expression which centuries had hidden, and to confront the bewildered Charles Dexter Ward, dweller in the past, with his own living features in the countenance of his horrible great-great-great-grandfather. Ward brought his parents to see the marvel he had uncovered, and his father at once determined to purchase the picture despite its execution on stationary paneling. The resemblance to the boy, despite an appearance of rather greater age, was marvelous, and it could be seen that through some trick of atavism, the physical contours of Joseph Curwen had found precise duplication after a century and a half. Mrs. Ward's resemblance to her ancestor was not at all marked, though she could recall relatives who had some of the facial characteristics shared by her son and by the bygone Curwen. She did not relish the discovery, and told her husband that he had better burn the picture instead of bringing it home. There was, she averred, something unwholesome about it, not only intrinsically but in its very resemblance to Charles. Mr. Ward, however, was a practical man of power and affairs, a cotton manufacturer with extensive mills at River Point in the Pawtuxet Valley, and not one to listen to feminine scruples. The picture impressed him mightily with its likeness to his son, and he believed the boy deserved it as a present. In this opinion, it is needless to say, Charles most heartily concurred. And a few days later, Mr. Ward located the owner of the house, a small rodent-featured person with a guttural accent, and obtained the whole mantle and overmantle bearing the picture at a curtly fixed price, which cut short the impending torrent of unctuous haggling. It now remained to take off the paneling and remove it to the Ward home, where provisions were made for its thorough restoration and installation, with an electric mock fireplace in Charles's third-floor study or library. To Charles was left the task of superintending this removal, and on the 28th of August he accompanied 2 expert workmen from the Crooker decorating firm to the house in Olney Court, where the mantle and portrait-bearing overmantle were detached with great care and precision for transportation in the company's motor truck. There was left a space of exposed brickwork marking the chimney's course, and in this young Ward observed a cubical recess about a foot square, which must have lain directly behind the head of the portrait. He found, beneath the deep coatings of dust and soot, some loose yellowed papers, a crude, thick copybook, and a few moldering textile shreds, which may have formed the ribbon binding the rest together. Blowing away the bulk of the dirt and cinders, he took up the book and looked at the bold inscription on its cover. It was in a hand which he had learned to recognize at the Essex Institute, and proclaimed the volume as the Journal and Notes of Jos. Curwen, Gentibue, of Providence Plantations, late of Salem. Excited beyond measure by his discovery, Ward showed the book to the 2 curious workmen beside him. Their testimony is absolute as to the nature and genuineness of the finding, and Dr. Willett relies on them to help establish his theory that the youth was not mad when he began his major eccentricities. All the other papers were likewise in Curwen's handwriting, and one of them seemed especially portentous because of its inscription, "To him who shall come after, how he may get beyond time and ye spheres." Another was in a cipher, the same, Ward hoped, as the Hutchinson cipher which had hitherto baffled him. A third, and here the searcher rejoiced, seemed to be a key to the cipher, whilst the 4th and 5th were addressed respectively to Edwios Hutchinson Armiger and Jedediah Orne Esk. Zrenia, or their heir or heirs, or those representing them. The 6th and last was inscribed, Joseph Curwen, his life and travels. Betten ye years 1678 and 1687, of whither he voyaged, where he stayed, whom he saw, and what he learnt. We have now reached the point from which the more academic school of alienists date Charles Ward's madness. Upon his discovery, the youth had looked immediately at a few of the inner pages of the book and manuscripts, and had evidently seen something which impressed him tremendously. Upon returning home, he broke the news with an almost embarrassed air, as if he wished to convey an idea of its supreme importance without having to exhibit the evidence itself. He did not even show the titles to his parents, but simply told them that he had found some documents in Joseph Curwen's handwriting, mostly in cipher, which would have to be studied very carefully before yielding up their true meaning. It is unlikely that he would have shown what he did to the workmen, had it not been for their unconcealed curiosity. As it was, he doubtless wished to avoid any display of peculiar reticence which would increase their discussion of the matter. That night, Charles Ward sat up in his room reading the new-found book and papers, and when day came, he did not desist. His meals, on his urgent request when his mother called to see what was amiss, were sent up to him, and in the afternoon he appeared only briefly when the men came to install the Curwen picture and mantelpiece in his study. The next night he slept in snatches in his clothes, meanwhile wrestling feverishly with the unraveling of the cipher manuscript. In the morning his mother saw that he was at work on the photostatic copy of the Hutchinson cipher, which he had frequently showed her before, but in response to her query he said that the Curwen key could not be applied to it. That afternoon he abandoned his work and watched the men fascinatedly as they finished their installation of the picture with its woodwork above a cleverly realistic electric log, setting the mock fireplace and overmantel a little out from the north wall as if a chimney existed, and boxing in its sides with paneling to match the rooms. After the workman went, he moved his work into the study and sat down before it with his eyes half on the cipher and half on the portrait, which stared back at him like a year-adding, century-recalling mirror. His parents, subsequently recalling his conduct at this period, give interesting details anent the policy of concealment which he practiced. Before servants he seldom hid any paper which he might be studying, since he rightly assumed that Curwen's intricate and archaic chirography would be too much for them. With his parents, however, he was more circumspect, and unless the manuscript in question were a cipher, or a mere mass of cryptic symbols and unknown ideographs, as that entitled "To Him Who Shall Come After," etc., seemed to be, he would cover it with some convenient paper until his caller had departed. At night he kept the papers under lock and key in an antique cabinet of his, where he also placed them whenever he left the room. He soon resumed fairly regular hours and habits, except that his long walks and other outside interests seemed to cease. The opening of school, where he now began his senior year, seemed a great bore to him, and he frequently asserted his determination never to bother with college. He had, he said, important special investigations to make, which would provide him with more avenues toward knowledge and the humanities than any university which the world could boast. During October, Ward began visiting the libraries again, but no longer for the antiquarian matter of his former days. Witchcraft and magic, occultism and demonology were what he sought now. And when Providence sources proved unfruitful, he would take the train for Boston and tap the wealth of the great library in Copley Square, the Widener Library at Harvard, or the Zion Research Library in Brookline, where certain rare works on biblical subjects are available. He bought extensively and fitted up a whole additional set of shelves in his study for newly acquired works on uncanny subjects. While during the Christmas holidays he made a round of out-of-town trips, including one to Salem to consult certain records at the Essex Institute. About the middle of January 1920, there entered Ward's bearing an element of triumph which he did not explain, and he was no more found at work upon the Hutchinson cipher. Instead, he inaugurated a dual policy of chemical research and record scanning, fitting up for the one a laboratory in the unused attic of the house, and for the latter, haunting all the sources of vital statistics in Providence. Local dealers in drugs and scientific supplies, later questioned, gave astonishingly queer and meaningless catalogues of the substances and instruments he purchased. But clerks at the State House, the City Hall, and the various libraries agree as to the definite object of his second interest. He was searching intensely and feverishly for the grave of Joseph Curwen, from whose slate slab an older generation had so wisely blotted the name. Little by little there grew upon the Ward family the conviction that something was wrong. His schoolwork was the merest pretense. He had other concernments now. And when not in his new laboratory with a score of obsolete alchemical books, could be found either poring over old burial records downtown or glued to his volumes of occult lore in his study, where the startlingly, one almost fancied increasingly, similar features of Joseph Curwen stared blandly at him from the great overmantel on the north wall. Late in March, Ward added to his archive searching a ghoulish series of rambles about the various ancient cemeteries of the city. His quest had suddenly shifted from the grave of Joseph Curwen to that of one Naphtali Field. And this shift was explained when, upon going over the files that he had been over, the investigators actually found a fragmentary record of Curwen's burial which had escaped the general obliteration, and which stated that the curious leaden coffin had been interred 10 feet, 6 feet, west of Naphtali Field's grave in Ye. Hence the rambles, from which St. John's, the former King's churchyard, and the ancient congregational burying ground in the midst of Swan Point Cemetery were excluded, since other statistics had shown that the only Naphtali Field, obit 1729, whose grave could have been meant, had been a Baptist. It was toward May when Dr. Willett, at the request of the senior Ward and fortified with all the Curwen data which the family had gleaned from Charles in his non-secretive days, talked with the young man. The interview was of little value or conclusiveness, for Willett felt at every moment that Charles was thoroughly master of himself and in touch with matters of real importance, but it at least forced the secretive youth to offer some rational explanation of his recent demeanor. Of a pallid, impassive type not easily showing embarrassment, Ward seemed quite ready to discuss his pursuits, though not to reveal their object. He stated that the papers of his ancestor had contained some remarkable secrets of early scientific knowledge. To take their vivid place in the history of human thought, they must first be correlated by one familiar with the background out of which they evolved, and to this task of correlation, Ward was now devoting himself. He was seeking to acquire as fast as possible those neglected arts of old, which a true interpreter of the Kirwan data must possess, and hoped in time to make a full announcement and presentation of the utmost interest to mankind and to the world of thought. As to his graveyard search, whose object he freely admitted, but the details of whose progress he did not relate, he said he had reason to think that Joseph Kirwan's mutilated headstone bore certain mystic symbols, carved from directions in his will, and ignorantly spared by those who had effaced the name, which were absolutely essential to the final solution of his cryptic system. Kirwan, he believed, had wished to guard his secret with care, and had consequently distributed the data in an exceedingly curious fashion. When Dr. Willett asked to see the mystic documents, Ward displayed much reluctance and tried to put him off with such things as the photostatic copies of the Hutchinson cipher and Orne formulae and diagrams, but finally showed him the exteriors of some of the real Kirwan finds: the journal and notes, the cipher, title and cipher also, and the formula-filled message, "To him who shall come after," and let him glance inside, such as were in obscure characters. He also opened the diary at a page carefully selected for its innocuousness, and gave Willett a glimpse of Kirwan's connected handwriting in English. The doctor noted very closely the crabbed and complicated letters and the general aura of the 17th century which clung round both penmanship and style, despite the writer's survival into the 18th century, and became quickly certain that the document was genuine. The text itself was relatively trivial, and Willett recalled only a fragment. But when Dr. Willett turned the leaf, he was quickly checked by Ward, who almost snatched the book from his grasp. All that the doctor had a chance to see on the newly opened page was a brief pair of sentences. But these, strangely enough, lingered tenaciously in his memory. They ran, "Ye verse from Liber Damnatus big spoke v rude masses and of Hallows Eves. I am hopeful ye thing is breedig outside ye spheres. It will draw one who is to come if I can make sure he shall be, and he shall think on past thinges and look back through all ye years, against ye which I must have ready ye salties, or that to make 'em with." Willett saw no more, but somehow this small glimpse gave a new and vague terror to the painted features of Joseph Kirwan, which stared blandly down from the overmantel. Ever after that, he entertained the odd fancy, which his medical skill of course assured him was only a fancy, that the eyes of the portrait had a sort of tendency to follow young Charles Ward as he moved about the room. He stopped before leaving to study the picture closely, marveling at its resemblance to Charles, and memorizing every minute detail of the cryptical, colorless face, even down to a slight scar or pit in the smooth brow above the right eye. Assured by the doctor that Charles's mental health was in no danger, but that on the other hand he was engaged in researches which might prove of real importance, the Wards were more lenient than they might otherwise have been when during the following June the youth made positive his refusal to attend college. He had, he declared, studies of much more vital importance to pursue, and intimated a wish to go abroad the following year in order to avail himself of certain sources of data not existing in America. The senior Ward, while denying this latter wish as absurd for a boy of only 18, acquiesced regarding the university, so that after a none too brilliant graduation from the Moses Brown School, there ensued for Charles a 3-year period of intensive occult study and graveyard searching. This concludes the 4th part of 9 total of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.